Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am Michael Shredder, your host for this podcast today. Thank you again for tuning in. I really appreciate it. We all appreciate it at the podcast company, and look forward to having you guys give us some good feedback. But anyways, the NBA obviously has had some incredible news recently, and just like incredible results. And we're going to talk about the Wizards-Celtics game. We're going to talk about the Lakers-Warriors, whether or not the Clippers ducked the Lakers, and then some upsets I think are going to happen in the first round of the NBA playoffs. So starting off today's segment, we're going to talk about the Wizards-Celtics game. So, look, the Wizards have been one of the hotter teams in basketball. They were 17-6 in their last 23 games, and they won 10 out of their last 15. Bradley Beal, Russell Westbrook, a fast-paced style. Everyone's looking at that and saying, well, this team is going to be real dangerous. And a lot of NBA players even thought that too. And it's because, look, they can score at a high pace. They play very quickly. They're starting to play slightly better defense. With all that being said, though, they couldn't get the job done in their first game of the play-in. And they lost the Celtics 118-100, which is very shocking to me. I thought the Wizards were going to win that game. I came up here and said how I don't even think the Celtics are going to make the playoffs. And look, obviously when you make hot takes and stuff like that, you have to obviously stick by it. And the reasons I had for the Celtics, were in trouble are valid ones. The fact is, Kemba Walker played really well yesterday. He has not been playing great all year. They've been riddled by injuries, riddled by COVID. Jason Tatum has been very good this season, but no one else really has stepped up. Their chemistry and cohesion has not looked very good. And also the fact defensively, they're not very good. They don't really guard anyone. And last night they kind of did a disservice to all those statements. They made me look, not good in terms of that. But anyway, Boston proved, I think, a lot of people wrong. They proved me wrong. They proved a lot of the doubters wrong. I mean, look, they're a team that right now is middle of the pack defensively, a team that people were not looking at very highly. I wasn't. And I thought there was going to be a major overhaul. I thought they were going to get this play-in, lose this play-in, and there was going to be major change coming. Not necessarily Brad Stevens being fired, but they're going to trade players. I thought Kemba was going to get traded, but he proved me wrong. Kemba Walker had 29 points last night. He played excellent. He really was doing a great job being efficient and getting to his spots and making plays happen. And if you really break it down, the two stars on Boston just played better than the two stars on the Wizards. So just for some context, Jason Tatum was the show of the night. He had 50 points, shot 14 of 32 from the floor, which is below 50%, but still a decent shooting percentage. Actually, it's not great, but it's okay. It's 44%, but 50 points is 50 points. And he was just carving them up all night, doing it in a variety of ways. Second half, he was brilliant, and it was big. I mean, the Celtics outscored the Wizards 49-46. Again, the Wizards had an opportunity to really, take this game in the third quarter. The Celtics had a 38-point third quarter to really break the game open. So, again, right, Bradley Beal had 25 points but shot 10 of 25. Russell Westbrook had 20 but shot 6 of 18. He did not have his, usual triple-double either, which I thought he was going to get a triple-double. And there's a lot of things I thought, and unfortunately they didn't come to fruition. and didn't come true. So when I look at this in the sense, Boston shocked me, right? I'm going to be the first one to say it. Boston definitely shocked me. More so that, the fact is Jason Tatum's had a very good year, right? But I thought the lack of playmaking by Jason Tatum would prove costly. But, the Wizards didn't have a good game plan. I'll be the first one to say it. I mean, when a guy's scoring at will, you got to have different defensive schemes on than putting little guards on him. And look, that's not always the coach. Rui Hachimura's got to stay out of foul trouble, and guys have to step up better, right? However, that being said, you can't just make those statements without looking at context, right? Boston constantly put longer, bigger defenders on Bradley Beal, and Russell Westbrook is not a great outside shooter, and sometimes you have to live with this with Russell Westbrook a little bit. The fact is, he plays really hard. He's the hardest playing guy in the league, arguably, right? He does a lot of good for your team, but the negative side of him is that he can be out of control, take wild shots. Sometimes decision-making is not always there in terms of making the right play all the time, right? Because he goes at a really fast pace. It's not to say that Russell Westbrook is not an intelligent basketball player, because he definitely is, but it's more that he goes at a fast pace and goes hard all game long, that sometimes he gets run into out-of-control situations. And that's kind of what happened, right? A lot of one-on-three breaks where he thought that he could attack it and make plays and just couldn't do it. And again, he's not a great outside shooter. He really hasn't been for the entirety of his career, and that's something that came to hurt them at the end, right? But the interesting thing too, I think thing that people are not realizing is that I look at this game and I have a few real big key takeaways, right? I think the thing is that Tatum and Walker played excellent, right? So Tatum's been playing at an extremely high level this year. He's averaging 26.4 points a game, right? Playing at a really high level. But this is the highest career points per game he's averaged in his career at this point, right? And Jason Tatum's only 22 years old. So the guy, he's got a lot of basketball obviously left in the tank. The interesting thing about Jason Tatum, though, too, is that he's been doing this at a really high level. And my apologies, he's 23 years old instead of 22. But you get the point, right? He's a young superstar who's getting better in terms of being a more efficient scorer. Now, the problem with him has always been playmaking, getting guys better around him. He has not been quite good at that, even yesterday. To be fair, he scored 50 points, but that is the one thing. He still doesn't make guys quite good enough around him. With that being said, though, he was excellent yesterday. Scoring 50 points in any big moment for him, that's big time, right? And he's shocked. I mean, look, Boston's shocked in the way they played. Kemba Walker had 29 points. I thought that the Wizards had the better duo because I would take Bradley Beal and Westbrook over Kemba Walker and Jason Tatum. But with that being said, the game really came down to the better duo, right? Who was going to play better out of the two guys? Because Boston's role players and Wizards role players didn't really score or contribute a whole ton to the game yesterday. So it really came down to who was going to contribute and make big plays late in the game or out of those two duos, right? Who's going to come up, make the big plays, produce a lot of points, get the guys involved, right? Get key defensive stops. And that was the Celtics, right? Jason Tatum had 50 points, Kemba Walker had 29. Right, Kemba Walker drew a lot of charges also in that game. And it came down to the fact that in basketball, it's a team game, right? I've always emphasized that. People think it's just star versus star. Last night was actually that stereotype came to fruition in the sense that you had to be the better duo in order to win that game yesterday, right? The Wizards shot 42% from the floor. The Celtics only shot they shot 39.6% from the floor. So again, it had to come down to which stars were going to take over the game because it wasn't a very clean game. It was kind of ugly at periods of time. But Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker outdid Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook, right? It was 79-45 in favor of that duo. And think about it, right? When you get to the playoffs, right, you want your duo to obviously do better, right, than the opposing team's duo or something else like that. But the problem always comes down to the fact that basketball is a game defined by matchups, right? Boston took advantage of their matchups. Boston had a better execution. Brad Stevens outcoached Scott Brooks, and that really came down to that fact. And I'll get into that takeaway in a second. But the second point I want to make, though, is that the Celtics showed toughness and they showed execution. What I mean by that is the Celtics have had a problem this year of really showing toughness, right? Being able to overcome adversity, being able to fight back from deficits, being able to overcome struggles within the game, come together as a team, show some grit and come ready to play, right? They had like that horrible loss to the Cleveland Cavaliers recently, where freaking Kevin Love scored 30 points. I mean, think about it. Kevin Love had 30 points. The guy like has been in and out of the lineup. He's only averaging 12 points a game this year. And if you think about that, right, that's a major, major problem. Because you can't trust a team that isn't going to bring any sort of grit, any sort of toughness, right? If you think about team sports, guys, right? Team sports, look, you have to have good coaching, right? You have to have good players. But you have to have a sense of pride and determination to be able to win those games and able to be the team that can be successful at the end of the day, right? For all those guys who play team sports, right? That's something the coach so emphasizes. Play hard, play together, toughness, right? Be tough, guys, right? Something like that, right? And the Celtics haven't really shown that all year. But last night, to their credit, they showed that grit. They showed that toughness. It came from those two guys, right? Marcus Smart played good defense, as he always does, but there was toughness there. From Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker saying, we're going to take this game over. We're going to show the toughness on this team, right? And look, I know basketball can't be defined by, the tougher team won, right? It comes down to a lot more times about execution, which I'm going to get into that in a second. But Boston showed supreme toughness against a team with the Wizards that has tough guys like Bradley Beal, Russell Westbrook, obviously, and even guys like Robin Lopez who've been there before, right? It was remarkable to see that happen. The next point, though, is that Boston had better execution, right? Got mismatches, took advantage of that, ran their sets well, right? Got efficient shots for Tatum and Kemba Walker consistently down the court. Now, the Wizards are a terrible defensive team. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, Washington is 18th defensively in the league, right? They've gotten better, right? They were really, really bad at one point. They've gotten much better, but they took advantage of the mismatches that were put in front of them in order to win this game. I'm talking about the Celtics, right? Brad Stevens did a very good coaching job putting Tatum and Walker in positions where they can use their isolation skills and be successful, right? Tatum doesn't really need the ball in pick and rolls to be successful. That's kind of where Kemba Walker thrives, right? That when a big drops, he can hit that three off that pick and roll, off that screen from the big, right? Works really well for him. Tatum can get the ball on either wing, right? You just got to get in that mid post where he can go to work, right? And the thing is, he took advantage of those matchups. They had smaller guys on him because Rui Hachimura was in foul trouble. Tatum took big advantage of that, right? Bradley Beal did the best job he could, but Bradley Beal is 6'3", Jason Tatum's 6'7", 6'8", right? Size does matter, and you have to be able to take advantage of those mismatches. And they did. The Celtics took advantage of that. Kemba Walker took advantage of Alex Len dropping in the paint too much, hit the threes, right? Got to the lane, used his skill around the basket because he has the ability to use his body really well to create contact. This was a game based on this fact of execution played a big part. And the fact is, the Wizards didn't make adjustments, right? That's the third point I'm going to make. The Wizards didn't make any adjustments. And the reason why that's important is because the Wizards need to show me that they're not just a team that can score a lot of points and win the games that way, right? Because I think that you have to be able to show some defensive adjustments, right? Jason Tatum had it going, right? He was cooking them all night with different moves and a variety of finishes around the rim and a variety of shots, right? You got to throw two guys at him, three guys at him. I mean, because the problem is Boston's other guys outside of Kemba Walker didn't do a whole lot, right? Evan Fournier was 3 of 11. He's your third best option. He didn't really play that well, right? You make those other guys beat you, right? You don't allow Jason Tatum to get 50 points. It's the same thing the Spurs have the problem with too. If Jason Tatum has it going, you can't just have him one-on-one. Jason Tatum actually is an elite level player. He's an all-star, right? Kemba Walker is too, right? He's been an all-star. But I'm saying Jason Tatum's a back-to-back all-star. And the reason for that is because he understands how to take advantage of those matchups in one-on-one. Again, he's one of the more gifted young ISO scorers in the league right now. He can hit you three, get by you, step backs, pull-ups, posts, fadeaways, whatever, right? So you got to be able to make those adjustments better in order to get the team to be able to make a bigger difference, right? And so when I ended up looking at that, the Wizards just didn't make enough adjustments for my liking. And, they got a big test. The Pacers just came off they routed the Charlotte Hornets without even Karis LeVert in the lineup. I think the Wizards ultimately probably win that game, but still, right? It's not going to be easy. And I think the last point is that, the stars versus stars battle, like I mentioned a bunch of times earlier, was the major key in that game. Because Kemba Walker and Jason Tatum outdid Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook, right? And it ended up coming down to that. I don't think basketball's always determined by that, but you need your stars to at least come up to play every night. And I'm not saying they didn't come out ready to play, because Westbrook and Beal did, right? There's no question about that. But they just couldn't. They didn't shoot the ball well based on the way Boston defended them. And due to the lack of adjustments, Kemba Walker and Jason Tatum took full advantage and played really, really well, obviously. And they outdid that matchup, right? And when you think about big games, you think about big moments, this is ultimately what it comes down to, right? Who's going to make the adjustments to win or lose a game, right? Who's going to make the adjustments? Who's going to have the better stars? Who's going to dominate their matchups? And the two stars on Boston outdid those stars on Washington, right? That was key. That was key for what they're trying to be able to accomplish, right? Getting that 7th seed against Brooklyn obviously is not a favorable matchup. But the fact that they're not going to be in danger like I thought they were of not even making the playoffs based on this play-in tournament shows that the two stars in Boston, if they can play like that, can actually, maybe take a game from Brooklyn, right? I'm not sitting here saying, oh, Boston's going to make it a series, because we don't know that, right? We don't know how consistent Kemba Walker is going to be every night and everything like that. But they did show last night that these two stars can make a huge difference in a ability to win games, right? And kudos to them. So, looking to the future, right? Celtics play Brooklyn, the 2-7 matchup in the Eastern Conference now. The Wizards play the Pacers on Thursday to determine who's going to get the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. So, my predictions for Boston are the fact that I think Boston will probably lose to Brooklyn in 5 games, because I think Brooklyn's just too talented offensively. I think Brooklyn is not very good defensively, but the thing is, 3 stars versus 2 is going to be difficult, right? Can Boston possibly make it a series? Yeah, but that all depends on the consistency of Kemba Walker night to night. He's been playing much better the last month of the season, but it also depends on health, right? Depends on how the role players like Fournier, like Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, if he can actually stay healthy for games, because he got injured again last night. You look at like Tristan Thompson, you look at a guy like Peyton Pritchard off the bench, Aaron Nesmith, right? These guys got to be able to step up outside of Jason Tatum in order to make this a series, right? Kemba Walker's got to play like that Charlotte Hornets level Kemba Walker, right? Can't play like he did last year in the playoffs and for most of the season, right? Because Brooklyn's going to be able to score. Brooklyn's the number 1 offense in the NBA, so they can score and have no issue doing that. However, the interesting thing to point out for you guys is that Brooklyn's also taken all 3 games during the year. And the problem is they didn't have their big 3 for any of them, right? And I think Brooklyn's going to, cakewalk through that, because I think the problem is I just don't think Boston has enough talent to beat them. I don't think they play well enough defensively to beat them either. I think if you don't have enough talent against Brooklyn, you have to have 2 very good stars, and you got to be able to play incredible defense, right? It's why I think teams like Milwaukee and Philly and possibly Miami maybe or not can actually pose a threat, because they have great defense and they have 2 stars or 3 stars that at least can offset the star power of Brooklyn, right? Boston doesn't quite have that on a consistent night basis. So that's kind of the issue I see with that. In terms of Washington, I think I still believe they can get the 8th seed. It's going to be a tough game. I mean, I think without Karis LeVert, it comes a little bit harder for the Pacers. If Karis LeVert was playing, I might like the Pacers in that matchup. The reason, look, the Pacers played incredible last night, right? Domantas Sabonis, despite not being as effective offensively as he usually is, he had 21 rebounds and 9 assists, and he was 1 of 8 in the first half and ended the game 7 of 15. So 6 of 7 in the second half, and the fact that he was taking advantage of his matchups. But the thing is, the star power of Washington should win that game out, right? I think overall, I would probably take Indiana's role players slightly, but Malcolm Brogdon has been playing well, but he just got back, right? Sabonis is really good, but you have to double him. I think they win slightly, but also, Washington's had success against the Pacers this year, and we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I think that there's a definite possibility that Washington gets the 8th seed, right? And if Washington gets the 8th seed, or the Pacers, they're going to get bowed out in 4 games or 5 games by the 76ers. They don't have enough talent to beat them, not enough defense, and the size really on what, those guys can't really handle Embiid, Harris, or Simmons, or Seth Curry. I mean, Philly's just a very, very good team, right? They got the number 1 seed for the reason, right? But what this ultimately taught me is that, the stars do, win out, right? And when we talk about the Lakers game later on in the show, we'll break that down too, in the sense that basically, these games are interesting, right? It's interesting to see the play and actually be in full effect. It shows that the importance of the regular season actually did matter in a sense, which I didn't think the play really showed me that. But stars did prove to be the difference in this game. And I think that is a, let's say, major reason, right, why Boston's going to be playing Brooklyn and the Wizards are not, right? Would have been cool to see Kevin Durant versus Russell Westbrook. I think a lot of people wanted to see that. But with that being said, we're going to see what the Wizards are made of on Thursday against the Pacers, right? It'll be very interesting to see that whole situation unfold and see exactly what happens. So I'm interested to see it. I want to see who wins that. But kudos to Boston. They came out prepared. They executed. Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker played excellent. And, that's the way Boston should have been playing most of the year, to be honest with you. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back, we're going to break down the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Golden State Warriors play-in game and talk about what this means for both teams going forward. All that coming back up shortly.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am Michael Schroeder, your host for this podcast today. Thank you again for tuning in. Really much appreciated. And I look forward to hearing you guys give some more feedback as we talk more about sports. If you missed my previous segment where I talked about the Wizards and Celtics, you guys are missing out on a big, big podcast. You guys are missing out on a lot for sure. Please check it out. You guys are definitely going to enjoy the content, and you guys will be missing out on a lot for sure. But with that being said, let's break down the Lakers-Warriors game, because that was an amazing game last night. A lot of crazy headlines for sure, a lot of crazy events. And you look at this stuff and you look at the way the game's been playing a little bit, it's definitely been interesting, right? Definitely been an interesting event. You look at the fact that the Warriors, gave the Lakers a game last night, right? The Lakers, for some context, have been riddled by injuries all year. LeBron's been out a lot of games. Anthony Davis as well. LeBron's been out 27 games, and Anthony Davis has been out 36 during the season. Dennis Schroeder's been in and out of the lineup because of health and safety protocols. So in terms of chemistry, they really haven't built a really good chemistry, right? They don't have a level of cohesion that they always need to win. But with that being said, the Lakers still found themselves being the 7th seed in the play-in. They still won 5 straight entering the play-in tournament, and they started to look a little bit better. Now, last night was a great game. A great game. If you guys missed it, you guys definitely missed out on a classic game, a game that definitely is worth your time and worth your effort to go watch. Now, with that being said, we're going to look at the fact that the Lakers won 103-100 yesterday. LeBron hit a go-ahead 3 with 59 seconds to go to ice the game in a sense. LeBron had 22, 11, and 10. Steph Curry, another marvelous performance by him. I said if Steph Curry has 35 plus, the Warriors got a great chance to win the game. The Warriors were in my opinion, controlled much of this game, and the Lakers just kind of turned it around at the end. But Steph had 37, Anthony Davis had 25 and 12, Andrew Wiggins had 21, and Alex Caruso, had 14 points off the bench. He was 5 for 5 in the first half and then was 1 for 7 in the second half, but still, really good first half by him. Other guys who contributed, Draymond Green had 9 rebounds and 8 assists. You look at Kentavious Caldwell-Pope had 10 points. Dennis Schroeder had 12. Now Kentavious Caldwell-Pope shot 3 of 5. Dennis Schroeder shot 3 of 10 from the floor. So not a great game by Dennis Schroeder. But anyways, right, that's kind of a little bit of a breakdown for you guys, right? So great game, low-scoring game. Both teams did not shoot particularly well from the floor. But what's interesting, though, right, is you look at this game, you really learn a lot, right? You learn a lot about the Lakers, you learn a lot about the Warriors, in the sense that, okay, right, you got a great opportunity here to watch some teams play high-level basketball, right? High-level basketball. Now, what's interesting to me, honestly, is that this game was not more deciding in terms of domination on the glass or domination from size in the Lakers than I thought it was going to be, right? But with that being said, I had some major takeaways. I had about 7 takeaways from the game, and I'll break them down pretty simply for you guys. Spend about a minute or two on each, and we'll go from there. All right, so the first one is that Golden State's a dangerous team, right? I think last night proved that to anyone who's watching the game. The Golden State is a dangerous, dangerous team. Now, with that being said, the reason why I think they're a dangerous team is primarily because they make things difficult on you because they're a top 5 defense. The guys know their roles prospectively in the team. Andrew Wiggins has played much better recently. He's been a pretty good second option to Stephen Curry. And they have Stephen Curry, who scores 35 no problem every single night, it seems like the last couple months. He's been the hottest player in basketball. Again, last night, shot really well from the floor. I think he was 12 of 23, something around those lines. Very efficient. And what's interesting about that, in my opinion, is that you watch this game and you're like, wow, right? The Warriors can be a real tough out. I mean, the fact they gave the Lakers everything they could handle, that just shows you again. Yeah, Steph Curry was 12 of 23, 6 of 9 from 3. But they're dangerous because it's the fact that Steve Kerr is one of the best coaches in the league. And that's pretty obvious why he is, because he knows how to game plan and scheme to get his team the best options to win. I mean, look at the talent on this Warriors team. They're not talented, right? It's Andrew Wiggins, Stephen Curry. And then outside that, you don't really have a ton of great offensive scores. I mean, Jordan Poole gives good effort, right? And Draymond Green can do some stuff offensively, but he's been really down in scoring. Draymond Green's done other things incredibly well, but his scoring's been majorly down from what it usually is. But that being said, I think they're dangerous because I think they're going to beat Memphis on Friday. That's not a guarantee, but I think they're going to beat Memphis. They just played them recently. I think they're going to beat Memphis because Andrew Wiggins played really well last night, and I think that is going to bode well for them. I also like the fact that Draymond Green played well. I mean, the problem is Memphis doesn't really have the athleticism at the big guy position. Well, that's not so true. They don't have maybe the small ball center defender ability to stop the Warriors' small ball kind of offense, right? The Warriors play best with Draymond Green at the 5, right? That means he plays center. And as a result of that, you watch that and you see basically the fact that the Warriors have a great opportunity to be successful, right? To dominate at a high level. And that's the way I go with it. So, the Warriors, what they do well is they move the ball, right? So you always are on your toes defensively. And ball movement is so important, especially when you're trying to win a championship and trying to make your mark. Now, look, the Warriors are not a championship-level team. They're not, right? But they're a team that can give Utah a big trouble in the first-round series. I'm not saying they're going to beat Utah, but it's the fact that they play really good defense. They can switch everything. It's not like Rudy Gobert's a great post player. So the thing is, they have guys in the court, even with Kevon Looney and Draymond Green, that can switch everything. And so that makes things really difficult for teams because if you switch everything, you can keep guys in front of you, which is so key at this level of time in the NBA, right? You got to keep guys in front of you. You got to be able to play solid defense. Now, the Lakers got a great opportunity in front of them, right? Obviously. But I want to just harp on the last thing, that the Warriors with Steph Curry, with Andrew Wiggins, with a really good cohesion about their team, a great defense, a great coach, they can be very dangerous because they've been experienced and they know how to play in these type of moments before. And look, I think Utah's size ultimately will hurt them at the end. But again, the Warriors always find a way to make do with not being the bigger team. And also the fact is they beat Utah recently. You don't know how healthy Donovan Mitchell's going to be, right? I talk about that later on when I break down some upsets that could possibly happen, right? But the Warriors are a dangerous team. They should have won this game last night because they outplayed the Lakers in every facet of the game, basically, for 3.5 quarters. The Lakers just took over the game when they had to. The second point I'm going to make, though, is that the Lakers made the plays when they had to, right? What I mean by that is the Lakers got key rebounds, key defensive stops. LeBron and Anthony Davis made big shots down the stretch and big plays to put them over the top, right? I mean, LeBron James hit a game-winning 3, right? Obviously, people are saying, oh, I was lucky. Oh, my gosh, LeBron's not clutch. Well, suppose that's his 97 three-pointer made to go ahead or in clutch moments. LeBron's a very clutch player. So people saying that, I don't really get that argument. They don't really have any facts to prove that. On go-ahead or tying shots, LeBron James shoots a little under 50% in his career, based on the numbers. So, and that's kind of ridiculous in my mind, but it's whatever. I mean, people are going to criticize him. I mean, look, I criticize him. I don't think for 3.5 quarters, I thought he didn't play very well. I really don't. His first half was egregious. It was very bad. But with that being said, he was 2 for 9 at one point, and then he ended the game 7 of 17. So he was 5 of 8 the rest of the way. He started to become more efficient, hit big threes when he had to hit them. When he had to be big, he played big. And Anthony Davis, right, hit big threes when he had to. Caruso got big backdoor cuts. Kuzma hit some big post-ups and backdoors, at certain points of the game. You look at key defensive stops, right? Key strategic plays that helped this team get over the top, right? So the Lakers did what they were supposed to do. They took care of business, but they made the key plays down the stretch that won the game. And when you get in the playoffs, you got to be able to make key play after key play after key play in order to make the most out of those games. And to be honest with you, that's where I end up going with the Lakers, is that they made the key plays in order to win, right? Warriors outplayed them for about 3 quarters, right? A little over that. But the Lakers made key plays down the stretch to ultimately seal that victory for them and move on to play the Suns in the first round of the playoffs, right? Which I'll break that down in a second when I get to my predictions. But another takeaway I had is that the Lakers finally took advantage of their size late in the game. What I mean by that is that they started to play more downhill and using their size and strength instead of just relying on perimeters, jump shooting, and looking cool shooting threes, right? The Warriors want you to do that because the Warriors like playing that way, right? They're a perimeter-based team, and that's how they play. Dribble penetration, kick out for threes. But the Lakers used their size. LeBron started taking advantage of his size. Anthony Davis started going inside more, right? That's what they have to do. If they have the size advantage, they got to start out by doing that and not trying to attack by shooting a lot of perimeter jump shots, right? Anthony Davis shooting a lot of mid-range jump shots falls right into Draymond Green's hands. Anthony Davis is very good with that. He's not taking advantage of his humongous size advantage over Draymond Green. Draymond Green's 6'6", 6'7". Anthony Davis is 6'11", right? It's a big difference. But with that being said, when the Lakers had to take advantage of their size, they did, right? They took advantage of their size. They used their strength. LeBron got to the rim a lot more. Anthony Davis did too. That was a big key because you have to be able to take advantage of your mismatches. I talked about this at the Celtics-Wizards segment, right? When you have a matchup in front of you, you got to be able to exploit that, right? LeBron and Anthony Davis are smart enough players where they can learn to do that on their own. But that's not always easy said and done. It's not easy to do that, and it's not easy to always be able to conquer that and be able to do it at a high level. Now, with that being said, the Lakers did what they were supposed to do, right? They took care of business, and that was because they took advantage of their matchup, their size, were able to actually make the most out of this game. And that's important as they continue to move forward and move into the next stretch of the season, right? Where they play the Suns, who are very good, obviously, and were rightfully deserving of that second seed. So, it's important that the Lakers learn from this game and learn that they have to take advantage of their mismatches when they get the opportunity. That is crucially important for them to try and make the run that they have to make and make the effort they have to make in order to win these type of games. The fourth takeaway I have is that LeBron's clutch, right? That was a huge 3, right? People say, oh, that was luck. No, it wasn't. LeBron hits shots like that all the time, right? No, I'm going to say LeBron did not play very well in terms of shooting the ball. Like, the Warriors did a great job of him. I give LeBron James a C for how he played yesterday. He played not great until he mattered most, but hitting that three was not luck. It was what he's done in the later part of his career, right? After that Miami blunder against the Mavericks, he started to really develop a much better clutch persona in terms of making clutch shots. I mean, are people forgetting that the finals run he had last year? Are people going to where he took over in Game 5 and against the Nuggets and just made clutch shot after clutch shot and eliminated them? Or even their loss to Miami in Game 5, where he just took over those games and completely took over it and won the NBA and got 41 points or 40 points or something like that. We're going to forget that. Or even in 2018, where he made game-winning shots against Indiana and game-winning shots against Toronto and took over that Game 7 against the Celtics, right? And those big shots down the stretch to force the game into overtime against the Warriors, where it's basically him and a less version of Kevin Love versus the entire juggernaut of the Warriors. I mean, people are just going to forget that? I mean, I don't think so, right? So, at the end of the day, he's clutch, right? So, that's where I'm going to go with that argument. He's a clutch player. He's proven it time and time again. He knows how to get it done. There we go, right? The fifth takeaway was that turnovers were key in the second half, right? The Warriors had the game under control in their favor because they took care of the ball in the first half, right? They were not, and look, credit to LeBron James. He got in the passing lane a lot, made a lot of steals, but the Warriors also just got a little bit panicky and left their feet a lot in passes and threw into windows that weren't always there. And the Lakers defense really stepped up, right? Made the Warriors turn the ball over a lot more than they wanted to. And as a result of that, the Warriors gave the Lakers a lot of transition opportunities for LeBron and Anthony Davis to start getting more comfortable. And when you allow those guys, great players like that, to get comfortable, they're going to start to get it going, right? And look, Steph Curry played out of his mind. I'll get to him in a second. But turnovers were key, right? Because I talked about this on the segment, right? You don't want to give a good team, especially in a playoff-type atmosphere type of game, you don't want to give them the opportunity to get easy buckets, right? You want to, make everything as difficult as possible, right? When you have a lot of turnovers in the second half, and especially in big moments, that gives a team like the Lakers great opportunity to go in there and make play after play to get themselves in prime position to keep producing at a high level, right? So that's what happens there a lot of times when you turn the ball over, right? You're not going to be able to run your offenses efficiently. You're giving the team a lot more opportunities to get transition buckets, so they get going with easy buckets, and you lose your lead on the game, right? So the Warriors got to be able to control that better. They got to be able to take care of the ball better because, look, I think they're going to get the 8th seed. I'm going to talk about the predictions in a second. But that is a problem that I saw and needs to be addressed. And the sixth thing is Anthony Davis and LeBron need to play better, right? They combined to shoot, 17 of 31 or something like that, right? Because 17 of 41, my bad. And, the first half they were egregious, both of them. Second half they played a lot better, right? But 17 out of 41 as combined, that's not very good. That's not good enough to win games. It's 41.46%. That's low, right? It's not very good. It's not going to cut it when it matters most, right? They got to play better, right? They both got to see in my mind because I think Anthony Davis did not take advantage of his size advantage till late in the game. I don't think LeBron James played very well. He didn't look like himself really. I mean, he looked good, but he didn't in terms of moving around. But people are getting excuses. Look, LeBron needs. I think they will both be better. And the problem with it is that they got to be better. They did enough to beat the Warriors, but the Suns are definitely better than the Warriors. So they got to do better in order to win that game, right, and win that series, right? But I think over a 7-game series, knowing how LeBron is, I believe in them more. They'll be able to get it done, but they got to play better. You can't shoot 17 out of 41 combined and expect to beat the high-level teams when it matters most, right? It's not that simple. You're not going to be able to always do that, right? So at the end of the day, that's where I go with that takeaway. And the last one is that Stephen Curry is simply a beast. I mean, the guy is just unbelievable. As we mentioned earlier, the guy won the scoring title. I mean, he's averaging 32 points a game, 48% from the floor, 42% from three. I mean, last night against the Lakers, the best defensive team in the league, he had 37 on 12 of 23 shooting, 6 of 9 from 3, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. Unbelievable, right? And this is what he has to do, right? He just goes out, and he's 33 years old. It's not like the guy's, 26, 27 years old, right? He's supposedly on the later half of his prime. It doesn't look that way. This is the best season of his career, right? If his team had a higher seed, he'd probably be the MVP, right? And he's going to get first place MVP voting. He will. But the fact is, that was an unbelievable performance by him. And he shows again why he's the best point guard in basketball. And this is going to be scary for teams which I think they will, if they manage to hold on and beat Memphis. Having him against the Utah Jazz is not a matchup I want to see for the Utah Jazz. It's hard to defend this guy. It's not because you're like, oh, let's get the ball out of his hands. But he's so good at moving off screens and without the ball. And Steve Kerr's really good at putting them in position through offense to get him the ball. Again, the Lakers had the number one defense in the NBA. Didn't really matter for him, right? He had 37 points. Didn't really matter at all, right? So at the end of the day, he's playing high-level basketball and doing what he's supposed to do. And that's going to really help the Warriors as they continue to progress until Friday, where they play the Memphis Grizzlies, who just beat the Spurs by 4, which I think they're going to beat the Memphis Grizzlies. I don't think Memphis shoots the ball well enough, and I don't think they're as good defensively in terms of, again, Dylan Brooks did a good job on Steph Curry. He still had 46. So, I know they're going to adjust their schemes and everything like that, but the Warriors, I think, are going to win that game, and I think they're going to get the 8th spot. So that's where I go with that. Now, so I gave you my prediction there, right? I think the Warriors are going to get the 8th spot over Memphis because I trust the experience of the Warriors more. I trust the coaching of the Warriors more. The Warriors are slightly better defensively. And three-point shooting, the Warriors are a much better three-point shooting team than the Grizzlies are. Grizzlies don't really have a legitimate three-point shooter outside of like Jaren Jackson or Grayson Allen, but those guys are not guys who've been consistent in terms of health or consistent in terms of their play. So, like, their best players are not really three-point shooters. Valanciunas, not a three-point shooter, right? Ja Morant, not a three-point shooter really, right? Dylan Brooks, an average three-point shooter. So at the end of the day, that's where I go with that argument. The Lakers, I think, will get it together. I think they're going to beat the Suns in 6 or 7 games. I think the Suns are going to give them a really good series because I look at the experience of the Lakers. I look at the size of the Lakers. I look at the defense of the Lakers being slightly better. I think that's going to, and the fact they have LeBron James and Anthony Davis versus Devin Booker and Chris Paul, I like the Lakers in that matchup, and that's where I go with that. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back, we're going to break down if the Clippers duck the Lakers or not. That segment coming back up shortly.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, guys, to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Michael Schroeder, your host for this podcast. Thank you again, guys, for tuning in. Much appreciated to talk about the NBA with you guys and just break down a bunch of stuff going on within it. On this segment, I'm going to talk about the Clippers, the whole debacle there. But before I get started with that, if you missed my previous segments about the two big play-in games between the Wizards and Celtics and the Lakers and Warriors, check those out. It would be much appreciated if you check those out and definitely listen to those as well. But with that being said, we have the segment right now talking about the Clippers possibly ducking the Lakers, right? This has been an interesting debate that has been going on throughout the week in the NBA sports world. A lot of sports shows and talk show guys have been talking about it. Look, Tyronn Lue came out and basically said, the outside people don't understand, are blowing this out of proportion. We're just trying to, rest the health of our guys. Fine. That's what the coach is supposed to say, right? And I don't like to be the guy who jumps to those kind of conclusions either, right? They're professionals. I think that, the Clippers are competitive enough that they're not going to want to duck the Lakers. And just to break this down for you guys, right? The Clippers are right now the 4th seed in the Western Conference. They're going to play the Dallas Mavericks next week. And to be honest with you, everyone thinks they're going to cakewalk through that series. I'll get through it later, but I don't really think they're going to cakewalk through that series. Their first game is going to be interesting for me. To be honest with you, it'll be interesting because, I like the Luka versus Paul George and Kawhi Leonard matchup, right? I really do. I liked it last year. I like the kind of tension between both the teams. But before I get carried away with that argument, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. Is that, did the Clippers duck the Lakers, right? Did they avoid them? Did they avoid the Trailblazers, right? So to break it down, we're going to give you a little bit of context about what happened, right? Context is always important when I'm making these sort of segments and arguments, right? Because you have to understand at least what's going on and, for NBA fans, explain what happened, right? So the Clippers, right? They had the last 2 games in their schedule. They were playing the Houston Rockets and the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Houston Rockets have won 4 games in their last 53, and the Thunder, entering that game against the Clippers, have won 1 game since their last 24 attempts. So these teams are 2 of the worst teams in the NBA. The Houston Rockets have the worst record in the NBA, and the Thunder are one of the bottom 5 teams in the NBA, right? Both teams heading to the lottery. Both teams that don't really have anything to play for, right? Nothing really to lose, right? They really don't have anything to play for, right? So these should be cakewalk games, right? Games that, for the Clippers, you have a week off after, during this week they're off, right? Because, the play-ins this week. So they get a whole week off. And basically what happened is they rested Paul George and Kawhi Leonard against the Rockets. They lost that game. Then they rested all their starters against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Lost that game. So by losing both, instead of getting the 3rd seed where they would play the Trailblazers in the first round, which I think would have been a really entertaining series too, and Blazers possibly could have won that series. The Nuggets get the 3rd seed because the Nuggets are the tiebreaker, and you look at the fact that, and the Nuggets also, I think, definitely something a little fishy with them too, but we'll get into that in a minute. But the fact is, losing these 2 games got them the 4th seed. They could have been the 3rd seed, right? Could have played the Lakers in round 2, and that kind of stuff. Right now, they played Dallas in the first round, which is a rematch from last year in the bubble, where these teams played in the 2-7 matchup last year in the Western Conference playoffs. The Clippers won in 6 games, right? Porzingis got hurt after Game 3, couldn't play. A lot of people think Dallas could have won that series. I'm one of them. I think Dallas could have totally won that series, but they didn't, right? The Clippers' stars ultimately prevailed. Luka he wasn't enough to beat those guys. Dallas' defense was terrible, and the Clippers took full advantage, right? Kawhi Leonard averaged 32.8 points a game in that series. Again, Kawhi Leonard, for the majority of his career, has been very good in the playoffs, right? He's had his moments where he hasn't been great, right? Last year against the Nuggets, he was not very good. And even sometimes with the Spurs, he couldn't get quite over the hump earlier. But with that being said, right, like you look at Game 6, for example, the NBA Finals, where he missed, key free throws down the stretch that led to the ability for Ray Allen to get a 3 down the stretch. But with that being said, you look at the fact that Kawhi's hobbling into the playoffs with a foot injury. He hasn't played very well. I think he's had 1 game over 15 or something like that in the last 6 games, right? That was against the Knicks where he shot 9 of 25. So the issue is Kawhi Leonard has not played very well. Paul George has had a very good season, but he has his playoff woes that a lot of people are not confident about. So the arguments that have been made right, is the fact that people think the Clippers ducked the Lakers. They're like, how do you lose 2 games like that? And they talk about, here's the things that they bring up. So people understand the context before I give you my analysis of what I think actually happened, right? So people think the Clippers ducked the Lakers because they think, well, you had 2 games on your schedule where you did not play your starters. You run bad executed plays at the end of the game that look like you're purposely losing a game. And it's terrible because they're saying that now people think the Clippers have, the Lakers have what the term is called the real estate in the Clippers' head, meaning that they have the mental advantage, right? And that's what a lot of people are saying, that they said it's bad for basketball, it's a bad look, the Clippers are never going to get over the hump, they're not contenders, right? If you watch any sports program, that's what they're most likely saying right now. Some people have claimed it being strategic, right? Oh, you want to play the Lakers later, right? So the idea is either the Clippers are a mentally soft team that don't want to play the Lakers, or it's a strategic play the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. But that's also assuming that you're going to get there. The Clippers have never gone to a Western Conference Finals in their entire history, right? And that's the arguments there, right? Either the Clippers are a mentally weak team that purposely lost 2 games to 2 hard teams in the NBA, so they didn't have to play the Lakers in round 1 or round 2. Or the second argument is that they're strategic in saying, oh, we want to play in the Western Conference Finals, and that's the way we want to do it. Okay, so you heard the arguments, right? The second one sounds, more fair and honest, like, oh yeah, they're probably doing it for a strategic play. They want to keep their guys healthy, yada yada yada, right? And that would make sense, right? Keeping your guys healthy if the playoffs started 5 or 6 days, right, from the end of the season. But it didn't. You get this whole week off, right, because of the play-in tournament that's going on, right? Because the play-in has to be determined to see what seed, who gets what in the East and Western Conference, who's the 7th and 8th seed, right? And as a result of that, you have to see exactly what's going to happen in that before the playoffs are set, right? But these teams get a week off. Sometimes even, you could probably say more than a week off, right? And obviously this is not a good look for the Clippers in any way from the outside looking in. From a basketball mind, though, I get the strategic ploy, but it does seem a little odd to me. The reason why it seems a little odd is that you do have over a week to rest, and you have the opportunity to do that. I think with the Clippers, with all the injuries they've had, the load management. Again, I'm a guy who has been up and down believing in the Clippers all year. I've changed my opinion a lot of times constantly with them, and I know it's not great to change your opinion on a team, but sometimes evidence gives me a different basis of my opinion and my faith in a team, right? So, like the Knicks, for example, I never thought was going to be get out of the first round type of team. My faith has wavered a little bit, right? The Lakers, I didn't really believe in them like that they were going to be able to get over the hump because of all the injuries. If they win tonight, I'm going to have probably more faith in that because LeBron James did look good in the last 2 games he came back, right? I have a lot of faith in the Sixers because I think that they're playing much more inspired, cohesive basketball this year. And I'm not a believer in Brooklyn because I don't believe in the fact that you can win with just no defense, right? With that being said, though, this thing seems a little odd to me, right? I don't like to make assumptions. I'm not saying the Clippers ducked the Lakers. It's not what I'm saying. But the thing is, it seems a little odd, right? You get a week and a half, over a week off to rest your players, to get them prepared for next week, right? You lose 2 games and you don't play any of your starters against OKC. You lose that game. You don't play basically your best players against the Rockets, and you lose that game too. To 2 teams, to the 2 worst teams in the NBA, right? That seems a little odd, right? Seems like you're like, okay, we want to lose these games so we get the 4th seed, right? And you're giving people an opportunity to say, well, you ducked the Lakers, right? And to be honest with you, it does look a little bit that way. I think it's more of a strategic play that is not really a smart strategic play, right? And I'm going to break that down, right? Because I give professionals more respect for that. I don't think, is it possible they ducked the Lakers? Yes. Are they going to come out and say that? Absolutely not, right? I give professionals because I think that the top players in the NBA, like a Kawhi Leonard, right, or Paul George, they're competitive enough they would like to see the Lakers in the first round. But I think it was a strategic play. The reason why I think it was strategic is that they're saying we're going to, lose these games so we can play the Mavericks, play the Jazz, right? The Jazz are kind of undetermined with the injuries to Donovan Mitchell, right? Not as much proven in the playoffs. And the Mavericks are a team that don't really play great defense, and Porzingis' health is always up and down, right? But I don't think it was a very smart strategic play by them. I really do not. And here's the problem, right? When you're like trying to be strategic, right? You're thinking about what's best for the team. How do we plan? You can't go into a playoff series thinking that way, right? If they ducked the Lakers, which there's a good chance they did, that's very, very poor in terms of the look for that team, right? That's why people are looking at this. They're like, is this team mentally soft? Do they actually want to win a championship? And to be honest, it looked a little bit like that to me. It was very odd, right? But I don't want to jump to that conclusion saying this team is mentally weak or whatever, because these are NBA guys, right? These are guys who work hard to be good at their craft, right? But I do think that this was a bad strategic opportunity if that was what they're doing. Oh, let's keep our guys healthy. Let's be strategic, right? Let's make sure we get more rest in. It's a bad strategic play, right? Smart strategic play is play the Lakers in round one where they're just coming off a play-in, where LeBron and Anthony Davis and Dennis Schroeder are just coming off either injuries or COVID protocol, health and safety protocol issues, and you're getting them when they're not in their most vulnerable position, right? That's where like the Suns would get them or the Jazz would get them, in my opinion, right? So that was not a very smart move, right? Because it does look like you're ducking the Lakers. It looks like you don't want to play them in round one, right? It also looks like you don't want to play the Trailblazers in round one, which I actually wanted to see that series personally, because I want to see Damian Lillard go in that little rivalry he has with Patrick Beverley and Paul George, right? Because they had that little banter back and forth in the bubble last year. As a fan, I would have loved to see that. With that being said, though, like people are sitting here saying like, oh, this is a great strategic opportunity. This is really smart what they did. Do you realize that as a series goes, they're banking on the injuries being worse to the Lakers as they go on? But the thing is, the Lakers could also get better cohesion as the playoffs go on, and then you're finished in the Western Conference Finals, and then you're going home again, right? Because I wouldn't take the Clippers versus a healthy Laker team. I wouldn't, right? I trust LeBron and Anthony Davis much more than I trust Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. It's more because Paul George has not had great playoff moments, and to be honest, Kawhi Leonard, for people saying he's been like the craziest clutch guy of all time in the playoffs, he did, mess up down the stretch when he was a baby in 2013 in terms of like being a really young player in the league, right? With those missed free throws. And then last year, the fourth quarters from games 2 through 6, he was terrible. He was terrible in those fourth quarters, right? He shot like 28% and played horrible, right? He played terrible. And I get it, right? For the majority of his career, he's been very good in the playoffs, right? He's one of the better players in the league. But again, saying that he's like this all-time incredible clutch performer, he's had moments where he hasn't been that, right? And most recently, he shot 6 of 22 and had, 14 points? Something like that? 16 points in a elimination game against the Denver Nuggets, Game 7, where they blew a 3-1 lead. Am I making up stuff here? Right? I don't think I am, right? That's the point I'm making to you guys, right? Is that if this is strategic, you want to play the Lakers in round one. You do. Because the Lakers are coming off injuries. They're coming off health and safety protocols. They're just getting their glue together. They just played the Warriors. Or they lose tonight they lose to the Warriors, or whatever, right? They just played the Warriors, right? You don't know. Right? You don't know exactly what happens. Right? They're just coming off the play-in, right, where, anything kind of gets determined. So you're getting a team that's not as rested as you, right, who's getting hobbled off injuries. You want to play them in round one where they're the most vulnerable. Not in the Western Conference Finals, where LeBron James is probably going to figure out a way to get them there, and then you're trying to figure out how to play against a fully loaded Lakers team. Right? And you also have to get to the Western Conference Finals. Remember that, right? You have to get through Dallas, which is not a cakewalk, and then you have to get through Utah, which is also not a cakewalk. Right? Like, I would take the Clippers in the series against the Mavericks, but I don't think it's just a easy series for the Clippers, right? Luka's had a great success against them the last 2 years. Porzingis has had success against them because their big struggle to guard is pick and pop and handle his mobility, right? Now, Porzingis' health, obviously, he's one of the more fragile stars in the game, because he's not quite a superstar. Consistency, of his health, not always there. But also the fact that Tim Hardaway Jr. is playing much better this year, right? Jalen Brunson's playing much better. The fact that, Dwight Powell's an athletic big that you can put in the game. right? Willie Cauley-Stein, right? I mean, this Dallas team is a good team. I mean, they're not a team that, I think the Clippers can just steamroll over. I mean, remember that 51-point loss that they had earlier in the year to the Mavericks with just Luka Doncic? I mean, people remember that, right? Paul George, right? Saying how he's going to be a different player. Lost by 51, right? How did the game down in Dallas where Luka, took over the game and beat the Clippers, right? Would I still take the Clippers in that series? Yeah, I probably would, but it's not like a set in stone. They're going to easily win that series, right? And this is what people are forgetting, right? Like, you're making these things like, we're going to be strategic. We'll see the Lakers in the conference finals where they get run down and we'll get it done. It's just very odd, right? It's very odd. Like, why would you do that, right? And then, look, if you beat Dallas, you're playing Utah, who's the only team in the NBA that's top 4 in either defensive rating and offensive rating, right? Donovan Mitchell will have another series to get healthy, right? Rudy Gobert's a guy defensively when you go to the rim is not easy to score on. Paul George has struggled against Utah this year. And, I probably would say the Clippers have a good chance in that series, but you don't know, right? This is why you can't be like strategic and think that, strategy is always going to play a dividend. You got to win the games. Like they should have played those guys in those games. If they're a little hobbled, all right, you have that whole week to rest. That's the point I'm making. It seems weird. Why are you doing that early, right? Oh, we're going to keep these guys healthy. We're going to be strategic. We're going to be smart. Oh, we're going to make smart decisions. Because it just seems weird. This is why the Clippers are not a contender to me. Because there's always something with them that isn't pulling in the right direction, right? And I want to believe in this team getting there, right? Like, I think they have too much talent to not get over the hump. But unfortunately, right now, there's more and more reasons I don't believe in them. They're and people are like, the ratings are skewed because they haven't had a ton of close games. In every close game, in a lot of close games they've had, their rating is terrible. I can give you some examples. The Knicks game recently, you can look at even just the execution they had down the stretch in their most recent losses. You can look at their losses to the Bucks, their loss to Utah, their loss to Denver, their loss to Phoenix. They're not a good clutch team. It's like the same issues all over again. The health, right? Load management. Again, I flip-flop on this team like all the time because I really don't know who they are, man. I mean, this is just weird. It's a very, very strange situation for me. Very weird. Right? Because you want to believe this team didn't do that, right? But the strategy, I also think, is just very dumb. Because you're going to a situation, right, where you're having the opportunity to play Dallas in the first round, right, which is not a cakewalk, by the way. Right? It's not like you're playing Atlanta or the Knicks, right? The thing is, the Clippers didn't even beat the Knicks recently. Right? So, like, people saying, oh, it's going to be a cakewalk. They're easily going to steam through the Mavericks. Is that necessarily going to, like, are you sure about that? I mean, they played last year when Tim Hardaway Jr. was not as good, right? Jalen Brunson wasn't as good. They didn't have Dwight Powell. Right? J.J. Redick's in the fold, too. Right? Are we sure this is going to be a cakewalk series? I'm taking the Clippers in that series, but I'm not sure it's a cakewalk. Very strange. Very strange situation for me. Because I don't get it. Right? I mean, look, if someone wants to comment and tell me like something I'm missing, I don't really understand, even for a strategy ploy. I don't think they ducked them, but it's just, I don't understand how that gets them better positioned and how they think that they're going to be able to just use that now and steamroll through teams. Because the Clippers' history has not proven that. And this team's history has not proven that. That's the problem with this, right? That's the problem with this whole situation. And with them, it's just like the Brooklyn Nets. It's just too much noise. That's not positive. Right? I mean, you have people really saying, like, this team's mentally weak and stuff. I'm not going to put it there. I just think it's a bad strategy ploy. Right? And that's the problem. That is the problem with this whole debacle. And that's where I honestly go with this. It's just it's a tough situation here. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when I come back, I'm going to talk about potential upsets in the first round of the NBA playoffs. Coming back shortly. See you guys soon.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, guys, to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Michael Schroeder, your host for this podcast today. Thank you again for tuning in. If you guys missed my previous segment, I talked about the potential to the Clippers duck the Los Angeles Lakers, right? It's a really interesting debate that's been going on in sports this week within the NBA realm. If you want to hear my comments about that, please check that out before you even start listening to this segment. You'll be missing a lot there. Also, if you missed my previous segments, I talked about the big two playing games, the Wizards Celtics and the Lakers Warriors. So before you even get started on listening to this segment, make sure you listen to those segments to make sure you're caught up as we get on to this last segment. Well, this last segment, guys, is going to talk about the potential upsets happening in the first round. Potential upsets. Well, it's going to be very interesting, guys. We have a very interesting looking first round, right? And here's what I think of it, right? To be frank, this is what I think, right? I think there's only really three legit upsets I look at and say are going to happen, right? Because, well, let's say four. I mean, the fourth one you might not really consider an upset, but I might, because I'm looking at lower seeds taking down top seeds, right? So here's my first one, right? So when I look at upsets, right, I look at a team that matches up really well with the team they're playing, talent-wise, experience, venues, obviously just the ability to come big in big moments, because I think that's important overall when it comes down to these big upset type events. Now, with that being said, I look at four key upsets in the first round. So the first one, obviously, is the Lakers over the Suns. I think the Lakers can definitely, and I think they will beat the Suns if the Lakers play them. The reason why I say that is simple, right? The Lakers have the better duo. Anthony Davis and LeBron James are more championship experienced. Chris Paul's been in the playoffs many times in his career. He hasn't gotten to a championship, a finals. He's gotten to Western Conference finals, never gotten to a finals. And LeBron James is the best player on the planet. Anthony Davis is a top 10 player on the planet, top 5 depending on the year. And the Lakers also are a team that now is clicking better. You look at the fact that the Lakers also are in a position to you look at the Lakers and you say, okay, the Lakers got a great opportunity ahead of them to make some noise, right? And when I look at the Lakers, you have LeBron James, you have Anthony Davis. You also have the number 1 rated defense in the NBA, right? I think Andre Drummond, from a physicality standpoint, it can give DeAndre Ayton trouble. I think the fact is the Lakers have not been fully healthy whenever they played the Suns, and LeBron James has shown that no one of the Suns can guard him. So I look at that. That's kind of like my predictions there for that, in the sense that I look at this and say, okay, look, the Lakers have a few things over the Suns, right? More playoff experience, right? Devin Booker's never been in the playoffs, right? LeBron, Dennis Schroeder, Andre Drummond, Anthony Davis, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Alex Caruso. All these guys have been in the playoffs before, right? And actually a lot of them have been in the finals before, right? Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, right? Caruso, obviously. Marc Gasol's won an NBA Finals before. The Lakers just have more going on their side, right? Ultimately, that's kind of where I look at it, right? at the end of the day, I look at the Lakers and I think they have the greater opportunity. And this upset I really wouldn't think would be an upset because I think the Lakers are the better team. They've just been riddled by injuries all year, right? LeBron's been out 27 games with a high ankle sprain. Anthony Davis has been out for like 36 games with a Achilles tendinosis. They've had Dennis Schroeder in and out of the lineup because of health safety protocols. So, at the end of the day, I look at this and say, okay, you got some teams here that can make some definite noise. But I look at the Lakers and I say, if they, Suns are the team. I think they would definitely. I think they beat the Suns in 6 games. I like that. I wouldn't even see it as an upset, but it would be an upset because the Lakers are the lower seeded team, right? The Lakers would be 7, Suns would be 2. That's the way I look at it, right? And that's ideally how I think things can unfold, right? And the reason why is because, look, I look at the fact that the Lakers have matchups that the Suns really can't defend, right? You're putting Dario Saric or Jay Crowder on Anthony Davis. I don't really like that matchup. LeBron James getting guarded by Mikal Bridges. He's going to dominate that matchup, right? And even if you put Chris Paul on LeBron, he's too small. You put Devin Booker on him, he's too small. Mikal Bridges is too skinny, right? So at the end of the day, I look at all this stuff and I say, okay, the Lakers are very, very good. But at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, the Lakers have the better players, the more experience, the better defense, slightly better defense. And that's ultimately why I think they're going to win this series. The second upset I look at is the Trailblazers over the Nuggets. Now, they just played recently, and people think that the Nuggets were ducking the Lakers as well a little bit. Like, they just didn't come out ready to play and didn't look very inspired in that game and didn't really put their full effort in. Okay. And that, like the Clippers, that could be totally true, right? It was a little odd to me as well with that whole situation. And the reason why I think the Trailblazers are going to win that series. Excuse me. So the difference is I look at the Lakers and I say, okay, you got the Lakers are the best team in the West when fully put together, right? Denver would be the second best team in the West if they had Jamal Murray, right? Because they have a good talent, but I think they don't have enough scoring at this moment. I think they need a third star. I think that Portland has been playing really good basketball recently. They've beaten some high-quality teams. And Damian Lillard's a real big matchup issue. Like, Campazzo's not going to be able to guard him. Or, and then Aaron Gordon guarding like C.J. McCollum. That's fine. I just don't know how that really works overall. Or even just like, bring Melo off the bench, right? Like, I think Jokic is fantastic, obviously. He's the MVP of the league. But ultimately, right, comes down to matchups. And I think Portland is too explosive offensively. And I don't think Denver has enough to beat them. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to the playoffs, right? Portland's had Denver's number, at least when they played in the playoffs, right? The last time they played in the playoffs, Denver lost to Portland, right? Mike Malone and Terry Stotts are both excellent coaches. I think it will be a good series. But I think without Jamal Murray and the way Portland's been playing recently, I wouldn't be surprised. When I say I would take Portland, I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised if Portland wins this series, right? Because Portland has been playing, very good basketball. So is Denver, but Denver doesn't have the offensive explosion, and also Denver just lost to Portland recently, right? Which doesn't really mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things because the Lakers look terrible against the Clippers and everyone like that. And they end up winning a championship, so it might not really matter, to be honest. But I think that Denver's offense runs through Jokic, right? If Jokic isn't going, that team's not going, right? Because Michael Porter Jr. is very good, but he also, gets a lot of his open shots off Jokic's penetration and the attention that Jokic gets on the offensive end, right? So, as a result of that, you look at the fact that the Blazers just have guys like Lillard, right? Matchup problem. McCollum, matchup problem. Melo, matchup problem. And when I mean Melo, I mean Carmelo Anthony, guys, for people who don't know the nickname. And then I look at like guys like Norman Powell, right? Yusuf Nurkic is at least going to keep Jokic at least engaged in the game defensively, right? And then you even look at guys like Anthony Simons, right? Robert Covington, right? Like Portland's got a very good squad, and they've been playing really good basketball recently, and they can score really well, right? And Portland's not a very good defensive team, right? They're 29th in the NBA in defensive efficiency, right? Denver at this moment in time is 14, so Denver's not great, but they're much better. With that being said, though, Portland is an excellent offense, and so is Denver. But I look at the fact that Portland has guys who've performed big in the playoffs. They have more stars, right? They have like 3 legit scorers. Aaron Gordon is inconsistent as a scorer, right? I know Denver at least has 2 consistent scorers, but we'll see what Michael Porter Jr. does in the playoffs. But if Michael Porter Jr. plays like he is now, could be a different story. But again, we have to see that in the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised if that does happen in the first round, though. Right? The Trailblazers over the Nuggets, right? Because it just, I think from a matchup standpoint, it doesn't favor Denver, right? They don't have a third legit scorer, right? Aaron Gordon's a very good player, so I'm not like trying to fault him. I'm just saying that a third legit scorer, I mean like another guy that can give you 20 to 25. Aaron Gordon's more like 12 to 17 kind of range, right? That's not good enough as a third scorer in the playoffs, unfortunately, when you're playing against these types of teams in the Western Conference, right? So I look at that, and that's kind of my reasoning there. The third upset is the Heat over the Bucks, and this is pretty easy for me why I think this could happen. Do I think it's ideally going to happen? I don't know, right? But I'm saying this could possibly happen because the Heat, strategy-wise, know how to guard Giannis, right? They really shut him down last year. They beat him in 5 games. Jimmy Butler outdueled Giannis and Chris Middleton and guys like that. I think Drew Holiday makes things much more difficult for Miami, but Giannis has not really improved that much more of his game than he did last year. And Eric Spoelstra, I think, is the best coach in the NBA. I do. I know Popovich is awesome. I know Steve Kerr is awesome. Right? Quinn Snyder is awesome, obviously. Thibodeau's an awesome coach, right, this year. But Eric Spoelstra understands playoff basketball. He's been the finals 5 times, the head coach. He was there last year. He beat Giannis last year. Now, I think Milwaukee's a better team than they were last year, right? I think they have more options offensively. Bobby Portis off the bench, Brent Forbes. You look at even guys like Dante DiVincenzo's been playing better. I mean, they look Drew Holiday, obviously, right? But Miami also has 2 very good stars, a bunch of shooters. They've been playing really good basketball at the end of the year, right? Really good basketball. And they're a team like the Knicks, right? They're excellent defensively. They're disciplined. They're not going to beat themselves. And unfortunately, in the playoffs, right, it's going to be about strategy, right? If Milwaukee moves the ball and doesn't have Giannis go 1-on-5 or just jack up threes all game, I think they'll beat Miami. But Miami could totally beat them because Miami has the size and the personnel to make things very, very interesting for Milwaukee in the first round, right? I think the series is going to be going 6 or 7 games regardless of who wins because I think Miami's good enough to get a few games. I ultimately probably will take the Bucks, but I wouldn't be surprised if Miami wins because I think Miami has a strategy to defend Giannis. I think they've been playing much better basketball recently. And I think that you look at this team as they progress, and Miami just has a scary nature about them for teams that they're going to play against. I mean, it's not going to be a cakewalk playing against Miami, right? You're going to get physicality, great coaching. Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo are great players. Then you also got possibly Victor Oladipo coming back. You got guys even without him, right? Trevor Reese is another great wing defender. Duncan Robinson can really shoot it. So can Hero. Goran Dragic's an experienced veteran who could score the ball. Iguodala, right? You got guys who know how to play, and that's a difference there. And that's what makes things very entertaining because, look, Giannis, you throw a lot of bodies to the wall. You have to have the size, the length, and the scheme to be able to defend that and make that wall work, right? Brooklyn doesn't really have that. So, I mean, if Brooklyn played Milwaukee, I think Giannis would dominate them. I would. He has dominated them all year. He didn't play great in the last game against Miami. He didn't play great, right? So, Miami over Milwaukee is definitely another option I look at and say this can really happen, right? So, that's where I go at the end of the day with that upset. The last upset, well, I have like two possible ones. I'll be quick on both. The Warriors could possibly beat Utah. I realistically think this happened, but like it's a possibility. And the reason why is because of Steph Curry. Golden State has a top 5 defense, right? Golden State just beat Utah recently, right? And you have Donovan Mitchell coming off an injury. And you look at the fact that Donovan Mitchell is coming off an injury, like I just said, right? He had an ankle injury. And you look at the fact also that the Jazz have been not playing as well basketball recently, and the Warriors have been one of the hotter teams in basketball. Steph Curry's been has been the hottest player in basketball at this moment in time. He just won the scoring title. And then you're looking at the fact that Steve Kerr is incredibly experienced in these moments, right? So are most of their players. But it's again, right? If Andrew Wiggins plays like a second option, they got a great chance. But Steph Curry can go off for 4 games, and that could, does Utah have a second legitimate scorer if Mike Conley's not healthy? Right? Rudy Gobert is great, but he can't really create his own shot that well. Right? Joe Ingles is a very good player, but not high creation. And then Jordan Clarkson's very, very good. He should be 6th man of the year this year. But he has a tendency to be very, very inefficient. Right? So, I think that's another upset that can totally happen because Steve Kerr's, I think, the slightly better coach. Steph Curry's the best player on the floor, which makes things very difficult. Right? They've beaten Utah before. And Donovan Mitchell's coming off an injury, right? So you don't know how healthy he's going to be coming back, right? Not necessarily not just the health, but like how, in sync he is in the game. Like, does he have rust, right? Is he going to be fully himself when he comes back, right? And also, Donovan Mitchell's not the most efficient scorer either, right? So at the end of the day, right, that could totally happen, right? I think the 3 upsets I just named before can totally happen. I think they're more likely to happen than Golden State over Utah. It totally could happen, though. Because Steph Curry could just score 40 points 4 straight games and they win, right? Whenever he scores like 35 plus, they usually win. And that's at the end of the day, that's going to be an upset that will be really interesting because I ideally do not think it's going to happen. I'm saying that's a possible one because just the way Steph Curry's been playing this year. He's second in my MVP voting. If I had a vote, like that would be the one I would go. I would go Jokic 1, him 2. But yeah, I mean, he's had an incredible year, and like he can pose a lot of threats because he's also had experience in the playoffs. He's a 3-time champion, right? He's a guy who's performed well in certain moments in the playoffs. He's a guy who's the greatest shooter ever to play, and this is like his best year, I think, of his career because he's getting doubled and triple teamed all the time, and he's carrying this team, to the playoffs. And it's just it's a very interesting sight to see, in my opinion. Kind of see what happens and everything like that. So it's really interesting. And it will be interesting to see how all this stuff progresses forward. So that's the 4th one. The last one, I'll be brief on this one, but it's not really an upset, but in terms of lower seed being higher seed, this could happen is one, Dallas beating the Clippers. I think, and then the Hawks beating the Knicks, right? Hawks versus Knicks wouldn't be a huge upset, but I think if it would be a slight upset because I think a lot more people think the Knicks are going to win that series. More because of the fact that the Knicks are just playing a little bit better basketball. They have the head-to-head and that. But I think a lot of people think the Hawks are the more talented team. So it's not really that one as much, but it's Dallas over the Clippers. And the reason why is because the Clippers have the slightly better talent, right? And the Clippers are a team that people think are a championship contender. A lot of people are not really saying that about Dallas yet because of Porzingis' health and their defense, the lack of it. So, and I think Dallas can totally beat the Clippers, by the way. I really do. Like, I talked about that in my last segment. I don't think it's a cakewalk playing against Dallas. I think Dallas is really good offensively. I think Luka's excellent. And it would be a very difficult series, in my opinion. So that's another upset, right? Because Dallas played very well against them this season, played well against them last year in the playoff bubble. And Luka has had major success against the Clippers, right? He has. And Porzingis has too. And like the emergence of Tim Hardaway Jr. being better, they have a little bit slightly better pieces. Jalen Brunson's better, right? You look at guys like J.J. Redick. You look at, they can bring Boban or Willie Cauley-Stein or Dwight Powell as another big, right? Dorian Finney-Smith, obviously. Josh Richardson's been playing better, and he's a guy who's a little bit better defensively than Seth Curry. Again, this is an interesting series to look at. I think that could be another really good upset because of the tension between those teams. I think the talent-wise, it's the Clippers are more talented, but it'd be really cool to see that happen too, because I think upsets are good for basketball. So that's just kind of the way I look at it. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Remember to subscribe to us and give us a 5-star review on any podcast platform you listen to us on, as well as like and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We would really appreciate that. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Michael Shredder, and I will see you guys next week. Have a good one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.